Today, a huge thank you again to Suffolk University's Sawyer Business School for hosting this conference. And Suffolk University hosts a lot of great opportunities for learning both in and outside of these classrooms. So we really appreciate their partnership in hosting the entirety of Startup Boston Week both last year and this year. The goal behind Startup Boston Week is to connect the entire Greater Boston and New England startup community across all industries, all startup departments, all bootstrapped and funding stages for 5 days of learning and connecting with one another. The team that creates Startup Boston Week is primarily volunteer, and the folks working the conference today are also all volunteering their time as well. So thank you for attending this conference. This is a labor of love, and we appreciate you all playing a role in shaping our startup community. Thank you so much again for attending, and we'll pass it down to the speakers. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Data Disco, designing your business model for success. So my name is Shubha LaForce. I'm a marketing analytics manager at Akamai Technologies, and I'm joined by this panel here, both John Calabrese and Tasneem Douala. And what we're going to talk to you about today is specifically about how you can leverage data and insights in order to help yourselves build a better business model. And as a startup founder, part of the founding team, a data analyst, there's a lot of things that you can do and leverage with the data. And sometimes it's a little bit hard to wade through that sea and identify what actually is important. So what we're hoping to do today is kind of like walk through a bunch of topics specifically about like what data matters, how you actually apply that, both like from a business sense and then also from a more specific use case perspective. And then, kind of have a dialogue and open conversation about that. So I'll start off by presenting our speakers here. So we have Tasneem. She is the founding partner at Excelestar Ventures. Notable investments for her include Augmenix and Envision, both acquired by Boston Scientific, Lantos Technologies, and Alistar Networks. She also serves as the investment committee of Catalyst Healthcare Ventures and as a managing partner of Golden Seeds, where they're actively deploying capital in Series A and beyond. Tasneem is very passionate about advancing women in leadership and has a long history of supporting female entrepreneurs and has been a prominent advocate for advancing their careers throughout her work. So, bit of an icebreaker question for you to start. If you were to choose a fictional character to be a CEO of one of your portfolio companies for a day, who would that be and why?
Fictional character?
Mm-hmm.
I would probably pick, so I'm thinking of my 5-year-old right now, so you can see where my mind is. Anna from Frozen, because she is bright-spirited, persistent, and very resourceful. And I think those are critical parts of being a startup CEO.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Never would have thought of that. Yeah, no, makes sense, makes sense. And off to our second panelist here, John Calabrese. John is the head of research at Agnostic. He is a seasoned expert in finance, technology, and data. As the former head of product at Nansen, he led product development and grew the company's ARR from 1 million to 17 million in a space of 9 months, and helping that company reach a Series B valuation of $750 million. So in his current role, he helps in advising on blockchain projects and delivering value to customers and stakeholders across the tech and crypto sectors. So icebreaker question for you, John. If your startup journey, if there was going to be a movie made about it, what title would you give it and who would you want to cast?
I like these questions. The title would have to be something around like navigating through the muck, or like somehow I'm not creative with movie titles, but it would be something around navigating through the mess. I guess it doesn't sound really great. I don't think it'd be like a blockbuster hit, but navigating through the mess. And I think that's what you have to really do, is like figure out the next best step, keep solving problems, keep yeah, like going through the maze and finding your way through to the end goal. So that's what I would. It's not a great title. Working title.
Work in progress.
That's what I would.
Cool, cool. So let's start there though. So talking about like, working your way through the muck and identifying and having to be persistent to navigate that. If we think about startups, the first thing usually that you're thinking through is that initial value proposition, right? So what is your purpose? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? So I'm curious from like, both of your perspectives. We can start with you, John, and then move to you, Tasneem. How do you, when you were, going through it in your day-to-day, how do you identify that value proposition, and what, data do you use to inform defining that?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, my experience is in SaaS startup land and building products for either retail or businesses, and either in the finance space or the crypto space currently, and trying to figure out what that consumer really wants, what that user, and I really don't like the term user because all the people that use these products are people. So have conversations with those individuals, really make a connection, make a human connection to your the consumer that's going to be using the product. And if you're not doing like product interviews, that's not you shouldn't be scared of doing that. That should be yes, you're building a great product, and I'm sure there's a lot of technicalities that go into that. But if you're not connecting with the customer, then you're going to miss the mark. So first understanding what they need, and then starting to develop around that, and then see if you're kind of scaling that out. I think that's the most important thing is like, yes, you have one person that finds your product successful, but can you now scale that out to 100, 1,000? So find what those commonalities are, and you have to be doing that through like just boots on the ground, having interviews, talking to people, and then looking through the data to see what they're actually doing and what kind of creates that individual that you think would be successful in your product.
So, I mean, I come to it from a little different perspective, right? Because I'm not creating the value proposition, I'm assessing the value proposition. And so, at least for me, a successful entrepreneur is going to be able to come out of the gate, like within the first 5 minutes, I should know exactly what you're doing. I should understand it. It doesn't matter how technical it is. You should be able to distill it and I know that everyone's like, oh, the elevator pitch. You know what? Don't worry about the elevator pitch. Just make sure you're clear in what you're doing and why is it important, right? It's not enough to just tell me why you're doing something. It's really important to tell me why it's important and what are you solving for? What's that market disruption or the market pain point that you're solving for, and why should I care? Why should anybody care? And there, in that lens to your data that you've sort of collected around your market. As in, what are are the customers looking for something like this? Do patients need something like this? Is the market sufficiently large? You don't want to be giving me sort of a niche, like this is really great for, 5 people. That's not, I'm being facetious here, but that's not going to be sufficient to get me excited, because in the end, when an investor is investing money, they have to feel like their dollars are going to have that eventual exit, and that exit is only going to be warranted or happen if it's a sufficiently large market that interests a larger company or the larger markets. So for me, it's less about what do I do to identify the value proposition, rather how do you communicate your value proposition to me and the context in which it arose, and why is that relevant to me as an investor?
Makes sense. Right, okay. That's super insightful. So like, let's pull on that a little bit. So identifying, like being able to like assess, particular value propositions that are put in front of you. So thinking about when you're kind of encountering those and, getting pitched all the time, what are like the key, necessary data points or like validation that you're looking for that are, whether they have to like hit those, and if those aren't presented, then it's kind of like a non-starter, where there's this critical thing that you did not like, you weren't specific about, and therefore you kind of missed the opportunity there.
Sure. I mean, I'm gonna build off of what John said. Like, the first thing is when you're presenting the value proposition, obviously, as I said, make it clear. The second thing is, as I alluded to earlier, is market size. It has to be a sufficiently large market addressing a large enough, i.e., addressing a large enough need. My threshold, and every fund is a little different, but my threshold is your market's got to be over $750 million, or just as something to throw, a data point to throw out there. Every fund is a little different about where their marks are, but that's my mark, that if it's below 750, and that's the market that you are going to be launching into pretty immediately after development phase. So it can't be, well, it'll build into that and maybe that'll extrapolate to that and then we'll get to 750. No, your nearly addressable market needs to be 750. So there's that data point. The second data point is customer validation. So depending on the type of company you are, right? If you're a tech company, what I'm looking for, at least in the stage that I'm investing is that you have talked to lots of customers. You're addressing a customer need that is articulated and acknowledged in the market as a customer need. They may not know, your customers may not know how to solve it, but that's why you're there. But there's an outcry for that solution, even though they don't quite know what the solution is. It's an outcry for that pain point. Now, on the medical device side, what I'm really looking for is early clinical, some sort of validation. So is there a first-gen product that's already in development, that there's an understanding that this space is evolving, that this sort of mechanism of action is validated through science? There is that sort of. So each one of our companies, what I would call is, very loosely, is there product market fit? Is there some scientific or customer, data that's out there that is signifying that what you are doing, your solution, fits with what is needed in the market? So that's a really important data point that we really focus on, besides the other things that I brought up. So for me, those are really critical factors to making my decision to invest.
Right, okay. That makes sense. And John, I guess as you were going through those phases yourself, talk about how you actually went about identifying those things, whether it was like through a mentor or like a feedback loop, and then setting up, your company to capture those and then properly, define and pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's always like the hygiene metrics that you have in SaaS, and that's the background that I come from. But there's many commonalities between the two, healthcare and life sciences and software. But the thing that obviously top line people are going to look at is ARR. And then how do you get to ARR? It's obviously going to be like daily active users, monthly active users, and things like that. And how are you getting, what is the stickiness? What is the kind of retention that you have for those subscriptions and things like that? You need to have those numbers readily available, but that's like surface stuff. What you really need to find is what is the leading indicator that brings you to that success. Because that's what investors are going to look for. They're going to look for, okay, are you hitting marks that look similar to my other portfolio companies, right? That's how they're going to put you against other companies. But the way that you get there is through yes, here's a component that we're seeing, like time spent on this page or time spent doing this feature or whatever it is. And if you can identify those things early on, those are the items that will lead to ARR and growth and subscriptions and whatnot. And that's your job to do, is to look through this and uncover those signals that will guide your business to success and VC or investor rounds and whatnot.
Got it. Okay, so clicking into ARR and revenue, I want to spend a little bit more time on that, because I definitely know when I was starting out, we'll figure out revenue later. Amazon lost millions of dollars when it was figuring it out. Investor, why don't you trust me to figure this out? I'll figure out revenue. What matters is the product and what I'm solving it for. How do you bridge the gap between that value proposition and actually getting to an actual workable model where you have a path to revenue that's actually clearly defined. Start with you, and then.
I think you should start as early as possible. Like, just be, I mean, the scrappy startup is, you know, figure out a way to get your product to market. Like, just figure it out. It doesn't need to be perfect. Try to get that first dollar, and then learn from that first customer, second customer that you have. And you can't be afraid to get your product in the market, right? I think that's what a lot of startups have, is like fear that it's not good enough. You can't do that. Like, just put it out there. Don't be afraid to fail. Learn from those failures. You know, these are common phrases, but you really need to accept that. But you're going to, by having your product out in the market, you're gonna learn a lot more than just doing like the R&D on the side. And yeah, I mean, you just have to, you have to put it out there.
I think that's a really good point. And actually, that was one of my sort of pitfalls, right? Is that companies, so let's just talk about a tech company for a second, and then I'll move to the medical device side in a second after that. But first of all, in startups, I look at two different things. They have to be able to build it, and they have to be able to sell it. That's pretty much the equation. A lot of companies can build it, they can't sell it. And you'll be surprised how difficult it is to sell it. I actually think that to me seems like the bigger hurdle for most of my startups than actually building. They can figure out how to build it, but then they can't figure out how to sell it. So, and sometimes you need different leadership teams to do those two different features. So in terms of the tech startups, what happens is a lot of times, because especially if you're doing software, you can keep getting customer data in, you just keep getting data, and then you keep building. But every time you are building and spending time building, you are burning cash. You are burning invested dollars, and you have to start doing the analysis between a good use of your fund and more product enhancement. And we actually have a startup like this, that this startup is really good at building product, really not good at selling products. So constantly building new product based on what customers are asking you sounds like a design firm. That's not an investable venture-backed company. So what John's completely right. You need to get your MVP out, your minimally viable product out, show what you can do with customers, get some feedback, iterate a little bit, but iterate on things that each customer will want the same thing. Don't be like customer A wants this, customer B wants that, customer C wants that. That's not scalable. That is custom design. Don't fall into that bucket of doing custom design. That's, again, not you. Investors want to see repeatability in sales. So yes, you got that first product market fit, but they want to know that you can take that product and sell it to customer B, C, D, and E in a very similar, obviously there's like a little bit of tweaks for each customer, but there shouldn't be complete different like products built for each customer. And then on the medical device side, I think you kind of take a look at that and you say, like, a lot of companies will come out and their big milestone initially when we invest is getting into human. But obviously the first product that gets into human on a medical device side is not going to be the commercial product. And if they try to get that product to commercial level by their first in human, they're going to burn so much time and cash. The market is going to move before they can even get out there. So what you need to do is you need to get an MVP, you need to do early feasibility work with what I would call friendlies, right? The docs that are using your device should be friendly. They should be willing to give you lots of really critical feedback, and there's just a few of them. You get that feedback in, you redesign, you get out and you do your large FDA pivotal trial. You're gonna get feedback during the pivotal trial. In a worst case scenario, you may even need to pause your pivotal trial to redesign, because what's going to happen is by the time you get your commercial product out there, you've probably taken in so much data and feedback that you may have iterated on the product at least 3 times. So the commercial product could be a 3rd gen product by the time you get out there. But that's okay because you kept moving rather than just sitting and just trying to iterate in your vacuum. You cannot iterate, you can't prototype or iterate in a vacuum. That's not useful.
Very well said. And if I could just touch on one thing, which is I think the most valuable commodity that you have as a startup is actually, it's not cash, it's time, right? Like, you need to use your time so appropriately and find the leverage in everything you're doing, right? And that's what, in every project that I've built, you think about the little tasks that you have to do, right? Find the things that are the most important to get the most impact out of those items. And yeah, I think that every stage, but especially early on, you need to be doing that and finding those things out.
Right. Okay. So that, that feedback loop and not, staying still is pretty critical. Curious how, when, at some point there's the conversation about like when to pivot. Okay. So it's just like, all right, I've tried this. Oh, time to like pivot. We're going to change our business model. Oh, we're going to completely reinvent ourselves. What is that right middle point to identify when it's time to stop and like iterate or like, actually do a pivot, or, versus like stay in the course? Because, when I've talked to like different founders, like there's always this thing, it's like, I don't want to stop. I don't want to give up because this original idea that I had, this original concept of how I was going to implement it and bring it to market, I don't want to let go of that. How do you, some people will call that, resilience, and then others will call it stubbornness, right? So how do we like, how can I like start to find a way to disintermediate between those two things?
I guess I'll start, which is you need to, and this is, it's the hardest thing to do is to say no to a project or an idea, like, oh,
Yes.
right, it's the hardest thing to do because everything sounds great on paper. And this is, the topic is data disco, right? You have to let the data guide you in terms of those decisions of to stop, when to stop. And if you're not doing that, you have to first establish the data set, and that's, making sure that that's a priority is to do that, to get that pipeline established, and looking at that and having a culture of saying we're going to be data driven in our decisions. That's a tough challenge to do, and not every company does that. But once you have that at the forefront of everything, it'll be easier to make those decisions. You'll say, this isn't working. We're not hitting the market. We're not getting those. And like you're looking at KPIs, certain KPIs, like we're going to make this decision if, key performance indicators, if we don't see, this amount of usage or this number of subscribers or whatever it is. And just have a time bound to that, like 3 months from now, if it's not happening, we're going to move on. I've seen most success with that, but maybe there's other options that you've seen, Tansy.
So on the tech side, I'll actually start with the medical device side because it's a little bit more straightforward. Medical devices and therapeutics are all about the data. You basically set up your trials to collect data. And when you have either adverse events or your data isn't showing efficacy, or there's some issues around safety, or the device is sort of failing in fatigue testing, you have to pivot. Like, you won't get FDA clearance, or you won't have a commercially viable product if you don't pivot. And I actually have a company that got some data back while they were doing clinical trials, that they kind of had a choice where the market, i.e. the doctors, the FDA, was saying, you can keep going, you're gonna be okay. But what they saw was the other devices that were out there that are sort of ahead of them, that are making pivots, and their data, what was an acceptable threshold at a certain level had sort of moved down to, the incidence had moved down. So they had, the bar for commercialization, for marketability, had shifted on them while in development. So they decided, we're not gonna come out into the market with a less marketable device, because this sort of market dynamic had shifted on them while they've been in clinical trials, and they decided to make the adjustments now. Sure, that costs money, that costs time, there's element of risk, but that risk, the company did a full 360, and this is when you do a full analysis of whether you should pivot or not, and this is the conversation I had with my CEO like multiple times. You can't go into it with like a confirmatory bias. Like, I know this is the solution, and I'm gonna do all this analysis to confirm my solution. Rather, you need to do the analysis completely independently, even bring in maybe independent consultants or experts to do that analysis and give you the data. And then as a team, management team, you need to assess, even use your board to assess and then decide, do I pivot now or do I not? And they decided they were going to make those developments or those changes to their device now. And I actually ended up talking to another CEO of mine just as a gut check for myself, saying, this is the hypothetical solution scenario. What do you think? And he said, your company did the exact right thing. And it may feel painful in the moment, but it's the right thing for the long term of the company. And they definitely made the right decision. And then on the tech side, I think if you keep going you have to watch, in all companies, you have to watch the market very closely. You're going to be able to benefit from, there could be headwinds that are happening in the market that you need to pivot for. There may be tailwinds that you need to get out into the market and benefit from. So you need to be constantly watching the market. There was a company of ours that was basically focusing on, sort of ethical data collecting for end users, or to just regular people, and then you could monetize that data. And then the privacy laws shifted on them, and they decided, wow, this is not that compelling anymore. And so they've completely shifted, and what they created was a company that is collecting specific data on people that opt in, and it's being paid for by large companies, brands, and then they're able to answer specific questions about, purchasers of the product that the brands are looking to investigate on. So they did a hard pivot. And I would say that company pivoted like 3 times in the matter of 3 years, because the market in their market was shifting so quickly that they had to be responsive. And the only reason they were able to proactively do that was because they were constantly looking at the data and were able to sort of shift accordingly.
Right. It goes to culture. I really think that's the key, is like, if you don't have a culture that's willing to look at this and have those challenging conversations, really tough conversations.
Yes.
Like, it doesn't matter if you're 2 people or 200 or 2,000 people, like moving in any vessel out of a different direction is very difficult. You need to get buy-in, you need to get collective decision-making around that. But if you have a culture of, we're going to look at this kind of objectively, looking at the data, and then making a decision, you're going to be so much better off when it comes time to make those really difficult decisions.
Right, yeah. So that data-driven culture, it sounds like from inception all the way through to like success is critical. Curious about what are like some of the pitfalls with that, both from, just give us some examples. So when you have that data-driven culture, sometimes there's an obsession with, we don't have enough data. We need to do more. We need to do more research again after and again and again. Or wanting to identify, or kind of like not paying attention to, certain like regulatory compliance things, right? Just like, we're starting off. Let's just move these files here and there, right? If you can kind of talk through about what some of those pitfalls are and how to get ahead of them, both from like someone that's like gone through the process of, from the ground up to a company, and also from an investor perspective, looking at a company's data discipline. What are those things that founders should kind of watch for?
So I'll start with this. It's called analysis paralysis. I mean, that's like the big cliche, but it's true. So any startup, any VC firm is going to be operating in an environment that's incredibly uncertain. VC would be a really easy job if you had a crystal ball, right? We don't. And you're gonna get as much of the story from the entrepreneur as you can, and then at some point you gotta make a decision. No one's gonna tell you if that company is gonna be successful or it's gonna fail. You just have to take the data and extrapolate what you think. Obviously, you're gonna get involvement from lots of experts. You're gonna spend a lot of time investigating and understanding, but eventually you're gonna have to make a decision with very imperfect data and in a very uncertain environment. And at that point, if you keep trying to get more data, do more diligence, you're going to go into analysis paralysis. And that to me is a big pitfall. And that's on the venture side. Company has the same situation. Like if they're needing to pivot, but they just keep like perseverating around, should we pivot? This is happening, this is happening, this is happening. As John said, time is really valuable. And you have to be able to make a decision with uncertain information and just keep moving forward. Obviously, get lots of opinions, expert opinions, even get opinions that you think could be completely counter to what you're thinking. Get as much information as you can and then move forward and do it quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the products that I've built, I mean, there's ways to get data jumpstart. Like, there's a way to jumpstart your data set, and you should do those things, like, you know, Google Analytics and Mixpanel and stuff like that for in the software world. Those are like basics, but then you could go too far in terms of like, do you really need like a BI team when you're like, you know, 2 or 3 people, or you're just building your product? It's not really necessary, right? And so you need to really have those cutoffs and kind of, you know, have examples of what other successful startups have done or companies have done. You know, there's a ton of people that you should be following or looking at that are saying like, here's like a dashboard or something that you should be looking at to guide your decisions every day. And if you don't have that, then you need to build it. But if you have it, you know, that's great. That's what you should be. That's step one. And then when you get into like, okay, now we're progressing in our data capture, and this is you also get into like later stages of regulatory scrutiny, I'll call it, or like, you know, we're both in like, you know, finance is definitely a regulated topic. Crypto, maybe not so much, you know, it depends on the stage. Healthcare, obviously, medical devices is highly regulated. But the further you get along, the bigger you get, the more you're gonna have that scrutiny. And it's better to have, it's less painful to adopt best practices and principles early on. I've had to do like SOC compliance before, and it's not fun. But if you start to like get to those principles earlier on, and you know, you're gonna save so much time and energy and effort. And there was one time that we were for Nansen, when we raised our Series A, we had to completely change our data capture process, and this was because you know, we were doing what we thought was an adequate job, but you know, different regulations and whatnot led us to the point where we only had 2 months to implement a complete overhaul of our system, which was not fun. So if we had thought about that ahead of time and said, you know, we're going to take a more kind of, yeah, I guess I'll call it like a cleaner or you know, less, we're not capturing a ton, right? Like, this is the thing, is we have like, you know, the European rules and regulations and California regulations and whatnot, and you have to adhere to those. But you should be doing those early on rather than later on, because it's just going to bite you later on.
Okay. I'm learning quite a bit too here. This is pretty interesting stuff. So, you know, taking that to like the next step, right? So, assuming you're at a place where you've got your ducks in a row, and now you're like, all right, I'm ready to get to the next phase. I'm ready to go, you know, Series A. I've gotten my first initial rounds. I'm ready to like go all the way. I'm curious, how do you? I feel like that's like the stage at which that market differentiation becomes even more critical. And then, you know, the potential growth that gets that, you know, investor appetite. So how, you know, I'm curious, like when you're evaluating companies, how do you identify that X factor, if you will, if like just more like concrete, just at least like from a general directional sense, like what is that makeup that are maybe a little bit more intangible, that you can kind of like latch onto, and then, you know, as someone going through the different rounds there, how do you take this data that you have, that, you know, different other startups will also have like some similar startup, to use that as a differentiating factor?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it, and then you know, I'll probably go in an odd direction. You could clean up. But I guess I would say the X factor in my eyes is like always keeping the business aspect of your operations very critical, because like I think you know, there's data by itself is not important. It's really not. It's building the insights that will guide your business, and having those decisions, lead to your roadmap or whatever it is. But if you're not like, and I deal with this with like, even like developers at like the very lowest level of operations. If they're not actually thinking about what the implications are for what they're building in terms of, I need these data elements. Why? Well, it needs to guide a business decision, or it's got to lead to moving metrics down the road. And I think that's the X factor that I've seen is like if you have that at all levels, you're going to progress a lot faster. I mean, there's some element of creativity, and we need to make sure that we give people room to do that creative, give them that creative space. But you have to have the business and the sales aspect, right? You have to be selling and know why people are buying your product. And if you don't know that at every level of the business, you're going to be struggling, or there's going to be elements that could be better.
I mean, for me, so first of all, just to back up for a second, every venture firm does diligence and sort of determines the X factor very differently. It's unfortunately, I would say it's very not scientific in terms of the differences between different venture firms. They have their own hypothesis investment, and they have their own way of sort of deducing whether a company is worthy of investment or not. There are definitely things that I've looked at that I'd be like, oh, I'd never invest in that. And they go and raise, $10 million. And then there are things that I invested in, and I'm like, why doesn't anybody understand the value here, right? So it's so firm dependent, and I know that's a bad answer for people that may be looking for funding. But my advice there is look at what they've invested in before, right? Don't go to a company that's only invested in cardiac and then try to, sell them something or sell them on an idea that's like orthopedic in nature. You're not done your homework, right? Like it's basic homework. Most of us put everything we do on a website, try to figure out what we're passionate about. What do we talk about? It's very clear on our site. We invest in devices that deliver therapy. So don't give me a diagnostic. That's not the same thing. And you're just not going to get over that first threshold of capturing my attention. So that's sort of just general advice. The second piece of advice I would give is the way we do a diligence. It's actually, obviously my gut instinct is important, but I have realized that everybody's gut instinct has all sorts of biases, and the way to deal with those biases is to use data. So we actually have in addition to the qualitative approach to diligence, which is like, customer interviews, talking to the team, and many, looking at sort of the competitive matrix, looking at the SWOT. The thing that we do now is we have a qualitative way or quantitative way of assessing each of our companies. We have a rubric, we have 8 factors that we look at, and we rank each company, and whoever is the investment professional in the deal, like myself and a junior professional, will do the same ranking separately, and then we come and discuss our rankings. So we have a numerical approach to ranking our companies, and we'll look at companies like longitudinally, like they were here at this point and now they're here. Should we invest more money, right? And so that allows our gut instinct to be more informed and perhaps take care of some of the bias. It also helps us figure out, like, why is something not feeling good to us? Why am I uneasy about this investment? And you can kind of it helps sort of start that conversation and figure out, where are you stuck? Where do you need to do more diligence potentially? And then the last piece I'll say is that data can be a really powerful indicator of how you've de-risked the business. And for every funding round you raise, you have set objectives that you're going to try to achieve with the money that you've raised. So, and as your company progresses, those set objectives are going to change. And so to be successful and to show me that you've got star power, I want to see that whatever set objectives you had for the previous round of money, that you've achieved them. And then I want to be wowed by the set objectives that you've set up for the money that I plan on investing. And because at every stage, you want to be de-risking your company to a point where an investor feels like, okay, I can get comfortable putting money into this company because they've done X, Y, Z already. So I think for me, using data to identify how you've de-risked the company from stage 1 to stage 2, that can be really powerful.
Awesome. So want to open up the questions for participants as well. So if you have any questions as we continue this conversation, there are a few mics around that we can pass.
Can you just talk a little bit more about the pivot? Say you're a software-based company, you've tried to attack the market, you've built a MVP, but you're seeing that the TAM, your assessment of the TAM was way off, but you see something tangentially. Like, any advice about, you mentioned some customer interviews, like just thinking about the data inputs and how to make that pivot, or advice to make it successful?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, you know, trying to figure out, this is looking through those interviews or that data that you have to see where can you, if you've built something already and you have an MVP out there, can you pivot this towards that, direction that you were talking about, the new direction, in an easier way? Is there a way that you could do this like hacky, so to speak? And I think seeing, but that is gathered through those interviews and that data that you were looking at. Is it like, is there some way that we could pivot light towards this new direction, if you think that that's the way to go? But I think this goes back to Tasneem, all of your market research is really what you need to leverage to do that, to make those decisions. And I know it's hard for early stage companies to figure out how to do that in a small way to get towards that new direction. But the decision might be that you have to scrap what you've built already and then rebuild, and that's a tough move, but you sometimes have to do that. If that's what the writing on the wall is telling you, just don't be afraid.
And I would say that this is where you can really leverage people around you. As I said, like besides customers, you should have advisors. Run your plan through your advisor. If you're lucky and you have a board, run it through your board. And I would say if when you're early and you have a board member, if they're shocked by you pivoting, then I feel like they're not an experienced investor. Right. Because I assume that every company is going to pivot somewhere. There's going to be a hiccup. If it was smooth sailing for the 10 years that we invest in a company, I mean, everybody would be doing venture, right? It's hard stuff. So I expect pivots. I expect hiccups. And what I expect as an investor is clear communication. I think it is so important that you communicate with your investors and your board. I mean, if you're running out of money and you communicate with them a month before you're running out of money, that is bad on your part. Like, I cannot stress communication enough, because as an investor, we don't know what's going on. In the end, we expect you to be the expert, and if you are not communicating with us, we cannot help you. We cannot open our Rolodex to you, we cannot advise you, and we can't get on board with your pivot if we don't know what's going on. So I think that a lot of people feel like they just want to keep everything to themselves and, oh, things aren't going well, so just keep it to themselves. No, all news is good news, because information is valuable and we can only help if we have the information.
Hi, I'm Emma Borison. I'm a data strategy consultant for primarily female founders. And as I've been building this consulting business over this past year, something I've noticed is the early stage startups where I think they can benefit so much from looking at their data and really investing in data, they may not see the value or think they see the value in hiring someone like me, or thinking, we're not big enough, we don't need a data warehouse, which of course I agree. What are your thoughts on either, are there certain stages you found when people sort of realize the value of the data, or do you have recommendations about how to, for lack of a better phrase, like convince startup founders that if they didn't come to this talk, that data is really valuable to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to, I mentioned like, what is the CEO or the founder coming into what are they looking at when they first wake up in the morning? If they don't have anything, that's a big red flag. Like they should be they should have a very, a broad overview of their business. And that's where, if they don't have it, they need to figure that out, in my opinion. And they need to know what those elements are that should be driving their decisions on a day-to-day basis. And even in an early stage, like as a CEO or founder, like your decisions are the most important thing that build the company. And yeah, if they don't have the information to make those decisions, then they're going to be struggling. So I would lean on that. And don't talk about data warehouse. Kind of leave that kind of jargon out of it because it'll just muck up. It sounds like it just sounds technical, right? Like give them here's why this matters.
So I think, thinking about here's why it matters, I think John's right. Like, as a startup founder, you need to know that you're progressing against your goals, and how are you doing that if you're not tracking anything? I mean, I just don't understand how you could do that. And then the other thing you can tell them is, how are you going to prove to anybody, including advisors, right? A lot of advisors will not sign up to advise and give their time and have you put their name on a deck if you do not prove to them that you are moving in the right direction. They need to see something. I mean, if somebody asks me to be an advisor, I'm going to say, well, show me that you're moving in the right direction, because everybody's time is valuable. So that's one thing. You have to be able to convince investors that you're moving in the right direction. So I would tell the startup, how do you plan on going into an investor meeting and explaining to them that you're making progress if you're not tracking anything? I mean, I think that it's almost for those companies that don't want to track their sort of performance metrics, whatever they may be at the stage of that company, I would, as an investor, I'd be wary to invest in them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Long term, it's not going to work, right? Like it just won't. So it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. So question for you all on the, when you talked about the pivot and so forth, having done an MVP and trying to figure out the market fit and so forth, have you all gotten, or any advice you can give from an investment perspective, what if you've determined that your market is actually a different geographical region from where you've started? Like you did an MVP and then you realized this is actually exploding in a completely different area than where I am right now. Does that deter you, or is that something, it's not US based, but the founders are US based, but we're actually seeing in this region over there is actually where it's taking off?
I mean, my software is obviously scales globally, and that's the beauty of it, right? So actually, Nansen was in Singapore, and the company I work for right now is out of Paris, and it's like, these things, you don't necessarily need a geographical location. I think it's different in medical services where there's different regulations. But sometimes, it does. Crypto it does better in low. Singapore has no taxes on that type of trades and whatnot. I think. But you want to be in an industry that does scale. I think that does help. I mean, you look at like WeWork or something like that. It didn't work because it just doesn't scale really. Like it's hard to move that business model to like every geographical region. But hopefully you can find a business that does work across the board. But yeah, if you're I think that's more of a marketing thing. Like if you have a product in software that needs to be in a specific region, you just need to market it better in that region. That's what I would think.
So I have a slightly different perspective, really quick. I think, for me at least, I think the CEO needs to be wherever, like located where I know, and this will be like very controversial for me to say, and it feels really old fashioned coming out of COVID, but I think the CEO needs to be where their main market is. Because the amount of organic brainstorming you're doing when you are building a new company, it's really hard to create those organic interactions through Zoom. So at least the CEO needs to be there. Obviously, salespeople can be everywhere. I mean, development teams can be remote, I understand. But the heart of the company needs to be where the main market is. Then you also have to be wary about investors, because a lot of investors will not, like US investors will not invest in companies that are domiciled, like their main markets are outside of the US. So then, but there's investors all around the world. So then make sure you target investors that want to invest in that market. But I don't think you should, if you think it's a really great opportunity and you feel like you can make it work logistically through the geographies, I wouldn't let it deter you. But I would also hire an industry insider or a geographic insider in that space, because even if you relocate to that location, you don't know that market the way an insider does. So I would hire an insider.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for your answers. But I do have one other question regarding, timeline that investors have. And let's say we know that there is a market, we know that there is a market product fit, but things changed. COVID happened, or maybe there was wrong signals, and maybe the timing was not right. But you already got the money. But then you have to pivot, not with the maybe product, but also the timeline to return. So what is the timeline investor says? How much time change they can tolerate?
Oh, wow. So every investor can tolerate different types of timing. And some of it has nothing to do with your company. Some of it has to do with when are they raising a fund. Some of it has to do with, are they growth stage, early stage, right? Early stage investors that are going in and seed, they can tolerate a lot of time. They're expecting, like 8-10 years. They're expecting that. Angel investors. Growth stage investors are not going to tolerate that, right? Like they're expecting, their timelines are more like 3-5 years. It just depends. You have to understand what are your investors' goals, and then you can from there determine what their timelines are. I mean, if we get an exit in 5 to 6 years, I mean, I'm flummoxed, right? I don't expect that. I'm expecting, and I start getting worried if I don't have an exit in year 10, then I'm oh boy, that company, what's happening there, right? So obviously we talk in between, but that's my timeline. But I'm an early stage investor. Growth stage investors, late stage investors have very different timelines.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that. So I agree.
Go as fast as you can.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, we have about 7 minutes, so maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, I have a question for a product timeline. So if you're developing a product for a very niche market with highly specific needs or requirements, would you still recommend getting MVP out as quickly as possible, or do you suggest that we should take some time to refine the product with those particular needs?
Oh boy, John, that's a weird question.
Yeah, I think we covered this a bit earlier, but yeah, it's definitely I guess it depends on the industry, but we did, I guess it was. We think we confirmed that it doesn't matter, because you should get the product out, you should get the MVP out as soon as you possibly can. You're going to learn so many insights from that, and you really need to start to understand, why people are going to pay for your product. And if you're just in a design vacuum, you're not going to learn those findings, and you're not going to get real feedback. People will, it's really like incentive-based feedback too. It's like people, if they're actually going to put money behind it, right, that means that it matters. But when they could give you feedback on a pre-released alpha, right, it's just going to be noise, and it's not going to give you any indication of will it actually work when you put it out in the market. So I think getting it out there is more important than not. Don't be afraid to fail, and then learn from those failings. Yeah.
And the only thing I would say there's like one nuance that I've seen where you could take your time, or a little bit more time, is if you're in an industry where one of the industry leaders is partnering with you in sort of like a joint development process where they've maybe put some money they've invested some money themselves, or they're just investing a lot of resources, and you know that they are going to help you because of their position in the market. They will help you develop a product that will be relatable to many similar companies. Then I think you have maybe a little bit more time, but then you also want to make sure that you don't become completely beholden to them either.
Awesome. So I'm going to take the last question. So kind of like a parting question. If you were in the audience, right, like 5, 10 years ago, what is something with regards to leveraging data in startup at any point through any stage do you wish that you heard at that point that would have saved you a lot of like hurt in the future? So what would you say to yourself like 5 years ago about something that you've learned that was pretty impactful about leveraging data in, you know, evaluating and like creating business models?
Well, I guess I'll try to start on that one. And I think it goes back to this, like adding the business. So I think you have three kind of pillars to your data strategy. And it's really like data, like understanding what the data pipeline is that you have. And then the second is the business metrics that, or you know, how does that data drive business decisions and business outcomes that you have. And then third is technology. Like, do you have the right technology in place to leverage that data, or you know, build that data pipeline, or whatever it might be. And at any different moment, you need to start balancing, you know, that three-legged stool, so to speak, and you know, adding. Does my you know, data need to be more integrated into the business? When I mean that, like, does sales need to have more data at their fingertips, or you know, does my tech team, do they not have, are they not actually like embracing this as a true effective use of their time? Because I think there's that, like, okay, we have a lot of things to do, like we don't need to add these lines of code to start tracking engagement on these pages. Like, I've heard that so many times. And if you don't have that culture, and if you don't have like, okay, we need to bring data back into the tech team, or you know, kind of explain that the business mindset to the tech team, then you're gonna have problems. So it's kind of like managing that balance all the time. And then, yeah, like making sure that your tech is great and that it's building a great pipeline. So kind of like, I think through all that, and like that's what I would tell myself like 5 years ago. Like, have a sense for that, and start to kind of guide your like how you're operating based on that.
So what I would say is that when you're talking to customers, and your customers could be enterprise customers, or your customers could be physicians or hospitals, they're going to identify their pain points in the moment. Like, what are their pain points today? But you are not launching a product today. You're probably going to launch a product 5 years from now. So you have to take what are their pain points and marry it with what's happening in the market and what are competitors doing, and where, you know, where do we see the world moving? So it's not just about listening to your customers in the moment. The real key here is being able to take the information that your customers gave, and here's where the visionary piece comes in, right? Because every entrepreneur that's successful, in my opinion, is visionary. They're able to see, where does that need evolve to 5 years from now, when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, whenever it is, you're going to be hitting the market. And that is the piece of information I wish someone had told me. That's really not about evaluating the need in the moment. It's really about evaluating the need, taking the need in the moment and extrapolating that out to when you're actually going to be in the market.
Awesome. And with that, that was Data Disco. Thank you all for coming out today, and it was a pleasure to have this panel with you.
Thank you, John. It was great chatting with you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, if you want to talk to the speakers, you can hang around, maybe talk to them a little bit. But also, we have a lot more in store for both today and the rest of the week, especially tonight. We have Startup Crawl happening that kicks off at 6 p.m. right from Suffolk University. And now in this room, specifically, the next session is going to be starting at 11:30. It's called AI Demystified, Real-World Marketing Wins from Startup Humans. So if that is not what you're here for, then you will need to change your rooms. And our folks in the registration desk right out front, they can help you where you need to be. If you're sticking around for the next event in this